We got the shirts finished, 100% cotton gauze. We ordered the material on Amazon. We chose the green and the blue to go with the colors that are shields, as you can see hanging on the wall back there. My wife hand sewn both of these shirts in their entirety, both the material together and the cross stitch. It's all done by hand. And before I get started, I'm going to go through the terms that I'm going to use. I doubt that they're the real terms that somebody who actually knew something about anything would use, but they're what I used, so at least to help you understand. I'm going to refer to this part of the shirt as the main body. It's essentially a fold that just goes over the shoulders. There's no shoulder seam up here sewn. Just fold it over. It is one straight piece measured the same width from shoulder to waist. The gussets are the piece that goes underneath the arms. There's two of them. There's one here, and then there's another one on the side, and these are essentially just triangles. This one here starts off as a square and gets folded into a triangle. This one here, well, you'll see more later on in the video. And then of course the sleeves. When I took the measurements for the sleeves, I measured just from the top of my shoulder down a little bit so that I didn't want them tight, but I didn't want them also real baggy. They're just going to get caught in the chainmail and the vest if they were too baggy, so I tried to make it as form-fitting as possible while still giving me plenty of room to move around. Put a reasonably well-fitting shirt on that I could use as reference lines, measured from the width of my shoulders, from the seam on the shoulder to the seam on the shoulder, and then the length from the top of my shoulder to where I wanted the bottom of the shirt to be, which was about fingertip length for me. I then used that length measurement to mark the fabric and fold on that line to double the fabric over. I flattened everything nice and neat, turned the fabric a quarter turn so it would fit on the cutting mat better, and cut the length off with a straight edge. And once I had the fabric cut down and trimmed to length, I let Haggard inspect it to make sure that it passed quality assurance. And once it passed inspection, I temporarily relocated the inspector. The next measurement I worked with was the width of my shoulders, and I measured the same distance at the top and then at the bottom, and then used a straight edge to cut them. And I know it looks like it's angled here, but it's just the way the fabric's laying. I took the remnants from the main body, which is the part I just cut out, folded it in half lengthwise to give me a little more to work with and less scrap. Then took a measurement at the top of my arm, right at about my shoulder, and then at the bottom of the wrist, about where I wanted the cuff to be. Squared up the fabric, and then marked from the fold down half the measurement of what I took at the shoulder. So if the shoulder was 10 inches, I measured down 5. I then measured from my shoulder seam to the back of my hand for the length measurement of the sleeve. I measured it down, drew a straight edge, and then went in from the edge of the fabric 5 inches, and that is for the gussets that are going to go underneath the arms to give you a little bit more freedom to move. Drew the flat line for the gussets, and then connected the cuff and the underarm, and cut the edges with a rotary tool. I then mirrored the fabric and made the same measurements and cuts so that I had 2 of these. These are the gussets. They're basically just 5x5 squares of material that I've cut the edges onto. They get folded into a triangle and sewn right underneath the underarms. And then the last piece to cut out is that triangle that joins the front and the back and goes up along the side. It's easier to show you than it is to try and explain it. This is that extra triangular piece that is sewn in as high as you want it to go. It could go all the way to the shoulders under the arm. In fact, we did with my wife's. What I did was I made mine start a little bit above my waist. It's just there to give the bottom of the shirt an extra little bit of room. This measurement can be whatever you want it to be. It could be wider, it could be narrower. These are just random things that we chose to use, and for the most part it's worked out pretty well. When I first started making these, I made the narrow end really pointy, and then I dawned on me it might be easier to sew if it was a little bit squared off, so there was a little extra material. Just be careful you get it all sewn up when you're sewing up the side. And with everything cut out, I folded the shirt in half and marked the neck area just so that when I got everything sewn together, I would know where the center point was. Laid it all out on the table to make sure it fit together, and then got Hagrid to inspect it one more time to make sure that it was good to go. And then it's sewing time. We started at the sleeve, started at the top and worked my way down the front, then flipped it over and worked my way down the back with the pins, and then I gave it to my wife, who sewed the entire thing by hand. Once she had the sleeves sewn in place, I pinned in the gussets, both the front and the back, and then more hand sewing. And then I started on the bottom triangular piece. Just pinned up the front, then folded it over, pinned up the back, flipped the shirt over, and did the same to the other side. And at this stage, there's no more pieces to add, so I went ahead and pinned up the entire thing all the way up to the underarm, and then more hand sewing. I measured the neck on a t-shirt and then adjusted my wing divider to approximate half that distance. Laid out a T-shaped grid on a poster board using a square and measured down a couple inches so that the center was actually further forward on the shirt, and drew my first circle, traced it out by hand afterwards because wing divider, not compass. Added a couple inches to the wing divider, and then made yet another circle, and this is the outer edge of the keyhole slot for the neck. Measured off the center line 1.5 inches so that I had a total of 3 inches worth of width on the keyhole part of the neck at the bottom, and finished drawing in my circle and rounding off the edges. Cut the circle out, then cut the inner piece out of the circle. I got Hagrid's help holding the poster board down and traced it out onto a piece of canvas for a test fit. Once we were happy that the test fit worked and the piece fit satisfactory, we traced it out onto the piece of cross-stitch material. I think that's what she called it. And while she was doing all of this hand sewing, I had drawn out a fairly simple Celtic knot style thing with a couple of dragons, and she pinned that to the cross-stitch material, held it up to the front door so that she could see light through it, and then traced the blue and the black dragon pattern onto the cross-stitch material. Then she cut the cross-stitch material down to a manageable size and started stitching. And to finish these two pieces was several weeks worth of nightly cross-stitching while watching Game of Thrones and Star Wars and pretty much everything else there is on television to watch. And occasionally work had to be put aside because Hagrid demanded attention. Once she had the designs cross-stitched, she went through with a piece of black thread, well, many pieces of black thread, and outlined the entire thing on both dragons on both sides. Then cut out the keyhole aspect, allowed a little bit of extra room to roll the edges over. Pinned it to the shirt and used an interlocking stitch on the inside of the collar, and then worked her way around the outside of the collar using the same stitch. During the research that I was doing for this particular cosplay project, one of the things I discovered is the Vikings are incredibly efficient with their use of materials. If there is waste, it's by design. The shirts will be longer or more embellished to show off more power or wealth. I guess it makes sense. If you have the extra money, then you can afford the extra material. Otherwise, their design for these shirts in particular was just insanely efficient. There's no material waste if you do it right. That's not to say that I did it right. I created a little material waste where there didn't need to be, but they were a lot of fun to make. I have an immense amount of respect for somebody that uses their materials as efficiently as possible.